Edward Hunter, renowned human diplomat and explorer, found himself crash-landed on the ice planet Glacius 7, surrounded by a group of breathtakingly beautiful alien females with bioluminescent skin and antenna-like appendages. This unexpected encounter was a far cry from the harsh punishment the Galactic Council had intended when they banished him to this frozen wasteland. Just days earlier, the council chambers buzzed with tension as representatives from various alien races debated humanity's fate. Earth's rapid technological advancements and expansionist tendencies had become a perceived threat to galactic stability. After hours of heated arguments, the council reached a decision. Edward Hunter would be exiled to Glacius 7 as a warning to Earth. The poorly equipped shuttle carrying Edward plummeted through Glacius 7's atmosphere, its life support systems failing upon impact. Salvaging what supplies he could, Edward set out into the planet's unforgiving terrain, battling howling winds and numbing cold. As he trudged through a relentless blizzard, hope seemed lost until he stumbled upon a hidden entrance to an underground cavern system. Inside, Edward encountered the Elani, a previously unknown alien species adapted to subterranean life on icy worlds. Their leader, Chieftain Odin, regarded Edward with suspicion, but adhered to their custom of sheltering those in need. The Elani had been isolated from the galactic community for centuries, developing unique technologies to survive in their harsh environment. As Edward acclimated to life among the Elani, he couldn't help but notice the curious glances from several younger females. Their bioluminescent skin cast a soft glow in the dim caverns, while their antenna-like appendages twitched with interest. Edward soon learned that these features were considered highly attractive by Elani males, and his presence was causing a stir among the community. Tension mounted as Odin's son, threatened by Edward's arrival, began to view the human as a potential rival. The young Elani male's hostility grew with each passing day, fueled by the attention Edward received from the females of their species. Meanwhile, on Earth, news of Edward's banishment ignited a firestorm of outrage and debate. Humanity's place in the galactic community was called into question, and the human government began secret preparations for a potential conflict with the Galactic Council. Fear gripped world leaders as they contemplated the possibility that Edward's exile was merely the first step in a larger plan to subjugate Earth. As Edward navigated the complex social dynamics of Elani society, he grappled with the weight of his responsibility to prevent an interstellar war. The fate of humanity hung in the balance, dependent on his ability to find a way to contact Earth from this isolated ice world. With tensions rising both on Glacius 7 and throughout the galaxy, Edward Hunter found himself at the center of a cosmic chess game. His diplomatic skills would be put to the ultimate test as he worked to forge alliances with the Elani, uncover the secrets of their advanced technology, and find a way to bridge the gap between humanity and the wider galactic community. Little did the Galactic Council know that their attempt to neutralize the human threat had instead placed Edward in a position to potentially reshape the balance of power in the galaxy. As he looked into the luminous eyes of an Elani female, Edward realized that his exile might just be the key to humanity's ascension among the stars. Edward's eyes adjusted to the dim light of the Elani caverns as he walked alongside Lyra, her bioluminescent skin casting a soft blue glow on the crystalline walls. Her antenna-like appendages twitched with excitement as she peppered him with questions about Earth. "Tell me, Edward, how do humans stay warm on the surface?" Lyra asked, her luminous eyes wide with curiosity. Edward chuckled, running a hand through his unkempt hair. "Well, we have something called clothing. It's like a second skin we put on to protect us from the elements." Lyra's antennae quivered. "Fascinating. And your mating rituals? How do they differ from ours?" Edward felt heat rise to his cheeks, thankful for the low light. "That's, a bit more complicated. Maybe we should focus on your geothermal technology for now." As they entered the vast Elani laboratory, Edward marveled at the intricate network of pipes and valves that harnessed the planet's core heat. Steam hissed from vents, powering complex machinery that hummed with energy. "This is incredible," Edward breathed, his mind racing with the potential applications for Earth and other colonies. "How do you control the heat distribution so precisely?" Lyra's skin pulsed with pride as she explained the intricacies of their system. Edward listened intently, recognizing the value this knowledge could have in negotiating Earth's position in the galactic community. Their work was interrupted by heavy footsteps echoing through the cavern. Crag, Odin's son, entered the lab, his muscular frame tense with nearly unleashed anger. "Human," Crag growled, his own bioluminescence flickering with agitation. "Your presence here is a disturbance to our way of life. I challenge you to combat, as is our custom." Edward's heart raced, but he kept his voice steady. "Crag, I mean no disrespect to your people or customs. Surely we can willpower this without—" "Silence!" Crag roared. "You will face me in the arena, or be forever shamed in the eyes of the Elani." Lyra stepped between them, her antenna rigid with concern. "Crag, this is unnecessary. Edward is our guest and—" "Stay out of this, Lyra," Crag snapped. "Your fascination with this outsider blinds you to the threat he poses." Edward placed a gentle hand on Lyra's shoulder. "It's all right. I accept your challenge, Crag." The news spread quickly through the Elani community. Within hours, Edward found himself in a vast underground arena, surrounded by hundreds of glowing Elani spectators. The air thrummed with anticipation. Odin's voice boomed across the cavern. "The trial of combat will now begin. May the strongest prove their worth to our people." Crag charged at Edward, his massive form a blur of motion. Edward ducked and rolled, narrowly avoiding a crushing blow. He scrambled to his feet, mind racing to recall his diplomatic combat training. As Crag lunged again, Edward sidestepped, using the Eliani's momentum against him. The crowd gasped as Crag stumbled, caught off guard by the human's agility. Edward pressed his advantage, striking at Crag's joints with precise movements. But Crag's superior strength soon became evident as he landed a glancing blow to Edward's ribs, sending him sprawling. Gasping for breath, Edward glanced at the crowd. Lyra's worried face stood out among the sea of luminous spectators. He couldn't let her down, couldn't let humanity down. With rekindled drive, Edward feinted left, then dropped low, sweeping Crag's legs out from under him. The Elani warrior crashed to the ground with a thunderous impact. Before Crag could recover, Edward pounced, using a grappling technique to pin the larger alien. Crag struggled, but Edward held firm, applying pressure to key points he hoped worked on Elani anatomy as well as it did on humans. After what felt like an eternity, Crag's luminescence dimmed slightly. "I yield," he grunted. The arena erupted in a cacophony of surprised exclamations. Edward released his hold and offered a hand to Crag, who hesitated before accepting it. "You fought well, human," Crag admitted grudgingly. Perhaps I misjudged you." As the crowd dispersed, Lyra rushed to Edward's side. "You're injured," she said, her antennae drooping with concern. "Come, let me tend to your wounds." In a quiet alcove away from the arena, Lyra applied a cool, gelatinous substance to Edward's bruised ribs. The pain immediately began to subside. "That was incredibly brave," Lyra murmured, her fingers gentle against his skin. "And rather impressive. I've never seen anyone best Crag in combat before." Edward winced as he shifted position. "To be honest, I'm not sure how I managed it myself." Lyra's bioluminescence pulsed softly, her antennae twitching with what Edward was beginning to recognize as affection. "You continue to surprise us, Edward Hunter. I find myself curious about many aspects of human interaction." Before Edward could respond, Odin's imposing figure appeared in the alcove entrance. "Edward Hunter," the chieftain intoned, "you have proven yourself a worthy warrior and a man of honor. I believe it is time we discussed your role among our people and the possibility of establishing communication with your world." As Odin spoke, Edward's mind raced with the implications. This could be the opportunity he'd been waiting for, a chance to bridge the gap between humanity and the galactic community. Yet as he glanced at Lyra, he felt a twinge of something unexpected, a reluctance to leave this icy world that had become more than just a place of exile. Unbeknownst to them all, high above the frozen surface of Glacius 7, a sleek human vessel slipped into orbit. Commander Sarah Morris studied the planet's readings, her face grim with dedication. "Prepare for descent," she ordered her team, We're going to bring our man home. As Commander Sarah Morris's ship entered Glacius 7's orbit, Edward found himself deep in the Elani caverns, unaware of the approaching human presence. His mind was occupied with more immediate concerns. As he followed Lyra through a winding passage to a secluded alcove, she had converted into a makeshift laboratory. "This is where I conduct my research," Lyra explained, her bioluminescence pulsing with excitement. The cavern walls were lined with crystalline formations that reflected the soft glow of Elani technology. Unfamiliar devices hummed quietly, their purpose a mystery to Edward. "It's impressive," Edward said, taking in the alien equipment, "but I'm still not sure about this, Lyra. Studying human physiology is one thing, but our mating practices, that's rather personal." Lyra's antennae twitched, a gesture Edward had come to recognize as a sign of curiosity. "I understand your hesitation, Edward, but think of the potential benefits for both our species. This knowledge could be crucial in fostering understanding between humans and Elani." Edward sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You're right, of course. It's just, well, it's not every day I'm asked to discuss my species' mating habits with an alien scientist." Lyra's skin flickered with amusement. "I promise to be professional. Now, shall we begin with a basic physical examination?" Over the next few hours, Edward found himself subjected to a battery of scans and tests. Lyra's touch was clinical but gentle as she examined him, her antennae constantly moving as she recorded her observations. "Fascinating," she murmured, studying a holographic display of Edward's internal structure. "Your cardiovascular system is quite different from ours, and these bones, they provide such excellent support." As the examination progressed, Lyra's questions became more personal. "Now, Edward, can you explain the human concept of dating? How does it differ from our courtship rituals?" Edward felt heat rise to his cheeks. "Well, it's a way for potential mates to get to know each other. We spend time together, share experiences, see if we're compatible." Lyra's bioluminescence intensified, her skin pulsing with a rhythm Edward had never seen before. "And physical intimacy? At what point does that occur in the process?" Before Edward could formulate a response, a low rumble shook the cavern. Dust and small fragments of ice rained down from the ceiling. "What was that?" Edward asked, instinctively moving closer to Lyra. Lyra's antennae stood rigid with alarm. "Seismic activity, but it's not natural. Something's disturbing the surface." They rushed from the laboratory, joining a stream of concerned Elani heading towards the central chamber. Odin stood at its center, his imposing figure radiating authority. "Our sensors have detected unusual disturbances on the surface," Odin announced, his deep voice echoing through the cavern. "We must investigate immediately." Crag stepped forward, his muscular frame tense with anticipation. "Father, allow me to lead a team to the surface. We will discover the source of this threat and neutralize it if necessary." Odin nodded in approval, but Edward felt a surge of apprehension. He approached the Elani chieftain, aware of the curious glances from the gathered aliens. "Odin," Edward said, keeping his voice low, "I have a suspicion about what might be causing these disturbances. Please, allow me to accompany the team to the surface." Odin's bioluminescence flickered thoughtfully. "You believe this may be related to your people, Edward Hunter?" "It's possible," Edward admitted. "If it is, I may be able to prevent any misunderstandings or potential conflict." After a moment of consideration, Odin agreed. "Very well, you will join Crag's team. But be warned, if this is indeed a human incursion, it will severely test the trust we have placed in you." As they prepared for the expedition, Lyra approached Edward, her antennae quivering with concern. "I'm coming with you," she stated firmly. Edward opened his mouth to protest, but Lyra cut him off. "This is not open for discussion. My knowledge of Elani biology and technology could be crucial if we encounter any problems." Reluctantly, Edward agreed. Soon a small group consisting of Edward, Lyra, Crag, and 4 Elani warriors set out through the icy tunnels leading to the surface. As they ascended, the temperature dropped noticeably. Edward's breath came out in visible puffs, and he found himself envying the Elani's natural adaptation to the cold. Crag led the way, his powerful form easily navigating the treacherous terrain. "Be on your guard," Crag growled, his bioluminescence dim with focus. "We don't know what we're walking into." Edward nodded, acutely aware of the tension emanating from the Elani warriors. He could only hope that if this was indeed a human rescue mission, he could prevent a violent first contact. As they neared the surface, another tremor shook the tunnel. Loose ice and rocks clattered down around them. Edward instinctively reached out to steady Lyra, his hand lingering on her arm for a moment longer than necessary. Crag noticed the interaction, his eyes narrowing. "Keep your focus, human," he snapped. "Your distractions could endanger us all." Edward felt a flash of irritation, but swallowed his retort. Now was not the time for personal conflicts. Suddenly, a faint sound echoed through the tunnel, a mechanical whirring unlike anything produced by Elani technology. The group froze, listening intently. "What is that?" one of the Elani warriors whispered, her antennae twitching nervously. Edward's heart raced as he recognized the sound. "It's a drilling machine," he said quietly. "Human technology." Crag's bioluminescence flared with anger. "So, your people have come to invade our world after all." "No," Edward insisted, trying to keep his voice calm. "This is likely a rescue mission. They don't know about your civilization. If we approach carefully, we can avoid any misunderstandings." The sound grew louder and a faint light became visible around a bend in the tunnel. The group pressed themselves against the icy walls, inching forward cautiously. As they peered around the corner, Edward saw a sight that filled him with both relief and dread. A group of heavily armed humans in environmental suits, operating a large drilling machine that was slowly boring through the ice. Edward turned to the Elani, his expression grave. "Let me approach them first," he said. "I can explain the situation and prevent any violence." Crag growled low in his throat but nodded reluctantly. "Go, but know that if you betray us, you will not leave this planet alive." Taking a deep breath, Edward stepped out into the light of the drilling machine, hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Hold your fire," he called out. "I'm Edward Hunter. I believe you're here for me." The human team froze, their weapons trained on Edward. For a tense moment, no one moved. Then a figure stepped forward, removing their helmet to reveal the face of Commander Sarah Morris. "Edward Hunter," she said, her voice a mix of relief and confusion. "We've come to bring you home, but it seems you have quite a story to tell us." Edward nodded, acutely aware of the Elani hidden just out of sight. "You have no idea, Commander. But before we go any further, there's something you need to know about this planet and its inhabitants." As Edward began to explain the existence of the Elani, he could feel the weight of two worlds resting on his shoulders. The next few moments would determine the future of human-Elani relations, and possibly the fate of both species in the galactic community. As Edward began explaining the existence of the Elani to Commander Morris, a low rumble echoed through the cavern. The ice beneath their feet trembled, and small fragments rained down from above. "We need to move," Crag growled, his bioluminescence pulsing with urgency. "This area is becoming unstable." Edward nodded, turning to Commander Morris. "We can continue this discussion as we head back to the Elani settlement. It's safer there." The combined group of humans and Elani began their descent, with Edward and Lyra taking the lead. As they navigated the treacherous ice caverns, the differences between the two species became apparent. The Elani moved with natural grace, their bodies perfectly adapted to the frozen environment. In contrast, the humans struggled to maintain their footing on the slippery surfaces. Edward found himself relying heavily on Lyra's guidance. She held his arm, steadying him as they crossed a particularly narrow ice bridge. "Careful," she murmured, her antennae twitching with concern. "Place your feet exactly where I do." As they progressed deeper into the caverns, Lyra's earlier scientific curiosity resurfaced. "Edward," she whispered, her voice low enough that only he could hear. "I've been meaning to ask you about human mating rituals. Is it true that you engage in physical intimacy for pleasure, not just procreation?" Edward nearly lost his footing, caught off guard by the sudden question. He glanced back at the rest of the group, relieved to see they were out of earshot. "Lyra, this isn't really the time or place for that discussion." Crag, who was closer than Edward had realized, let out a low growl. Focus on the path, not your absurd questions about human biology. Lyra's bioluminescence flickered with embarrassment, but her curiosity remained undiminished. As they continued their descent, she peppered Edward with increasingly personal questions about human physiology and intimate behaviors. Edward did his best to deflect her inquiries, acutely aware of the growing tension within the group. Commander Morris shot him questioning looks, while Crag's bioluminescence pulsed with terrifying irritation. Suddenly, a new vibration shook the cavern, different from the earlier tremors. Edward recognized the rhythmic pattern immediately. "That's human technology," he said, turning to Commander Morris. "Did you bring any heavy equipment?" Before she could respond, a deafening crack split the air. The ice above them began to splinter, revealing glimpses of artificial light. "They're breaking through!" Crag shouted, his voice echoing off the walls. In the chaos that followed, Edward's focus narrowed to a single point: Lyra. As chunks of ice rained down, he acted on instinct, pushing her out of the path of a massive falling boulder. They tumbled together, Edward's body shielding hers as they hit the ground. For a moment all was still. Edward lifted his head, his eyes meeting Lyra's. Her bioluminescence pulsed rapidly, her antennae quivering with a mix of fear and something else. Something Edward couldn't quite identify. "Are you all right?" he asked, suddenly aware of how close they were. Before Lyra could respond, Crag's voice cut through the settling dust. "Everyone, stand back!" The Elani warriors stepped forward, raising their hands in unison. A soft blue light emanated from their palms, enveloping the fractured ice. Before Edward's eyes, the cracks began to seal, the cavern stabilizing under the influence of the Elani's ice manipulation technology. As the immediate danger passed, Edward realized that he and Lyra had been separated from the main group. A wall of ice now stood between them and the others, sealing them in a small, isolated chamber. "Edward? Lyra? Can you hear me?" Crag's muffled voice came through the ice. "We're here," Edward called back. "We're okay. Can you get us out?" "The ice is too unstable," Crag replied. "We'll have to find another way around. Stay put and conserve your energy. We'll come for you." As Crag's voice faded, Edward turned to Lyra. In the confined space, her bioluminescence seemed brighter, casting a soft, pulsating glow over the icy walls. Her antennae were moving in a pattern Edward had never seen before, and her skin seemed to shimmer with an intense, almost mesmerizing rhythm. "Edward," Lyra said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I need to confess something. My research into human mating practices, it wasn't purely academic. I've been experiencing feelings, emotions I don't fully understand. Being here with you, like this..." She trailed off, her bioluminescence flickering rapidly. Edward felt his heart rate increase, a mix of attraction and uncertainty washing over him. He was acutely aware of Lyra's alien beauty, the graceful curves of her form, the hypnotic patterns of light playing across her skin, but he was also keenly conscious of the vast differences between their species, the potential complications of any deeper connection. "Lyra," he began, struggling to find the right words. I'm flattered, and I'd be lying if I said I haven't felt a connection with you. But this is complicated. We're from different worlds, literally, and right now we need to focus on getting out of here and preventing any conflict between our people." Lyra's antenna drooped slightly, but she nodded in understanding. "Of course, you're right, but perhaps when this is over, we could explore these feelings further. I'm curious about human concepts of love and companionship. They seem so different from Elani customs." Edward smiled, reaching out to gently touch one of Lyra's antennae. "I'd like that, but for now, let's focus on finding a way out of here." Together, they began to examine their icy prison, looking for any weakness or potential escape route. As they worked, Edward couldn't help but notice how naturally they moved together, anticipating each other's needs and actions. Despite the dire circumstances, he felt a growing warmth in his chest, a sense of connection that transcended the boundaries of their different species. Outside their icy chamber, two vastly different groups were coming face to face for the first time. Crag stood tall, his imposing figure a stark contrast to the heavily suited human rescue team. Commander Morris stepped forward, her hand hovering near her weapon, but not drawing it. "I am Commander Sarah Morris of Earth," she announced, her voice firm but non-threatening. "We've come in peace, seeking our lost comrade." Crag's bioluminescence pulsed as he activated a rudimentary translation device. "I am Crag, son of Odin, warrior of the Elani," he replied. "Your comrade is safe. He has lived among us and earned our trust." As the two groups began a cautious dialogue, the future of human-Elani relations hung in the balance. And deep within the ice, Edward and Lyra worked together, their growing bond a testament to the potential for understanding between their two worlds. Species. And deep within the ice, Edward and Lyra worked together, their growing bond a testament to the potential for understanding between their two worlds. As they searched for weaknesses in their icy prison, Edward's hand brushed against Lyra's, sending a spark of electricity through them both. Their eyes met, and for a moment the cold cavern seemed to fade away. But before either could speak, a loud crack echoed through the chamber. A fissure appeared in the ice wall, spreading rapidly. "Stand back!" Edward called, pulling Lyra away from the crumbling barrier. With a thunderous crash, the wall collapsed, revealing the anxious faces of both humans and Elani. Crag stepped forward, his bioluminescence pulsing with relief. "You're unharmed. Good. We have a situation." Edward and Lyra emerged from the chamber, blinking in the harsh light of the human team's flood lamps. Commander Morris stood at the forefront, her posture tense but controlled. "Edward," she said, her voice tight, "I believe some introductions are in order." Taking a deep breath, Edward stepped between the two groups. "Commander Morris, this is Crag, son of Odin, warrior of the Elani. And this," he gestured to Lyra, whose antennae were twitching with a mix of excitement and apprehension, "is Lyra, an Elani scientist who has been my primary contact during my time here." As Edward spoke, he could see the human team's eyes widening, taking in the alien features of the Elani. Some hands tightened on weapons, while others reached for scientific instruments. "Crag, Lyra, this is Commander Sarah Morris of Earth," Edward continued. "She and her team have come in peace, searching for me." Crag's bioluminescence flickered in a pattern Edward had come to recognize as skepticism. "Peace? Your weapons suggest otherwise." Commander Morris raised her hands in a placating gesture. "Standard precaution for an unknown environment. We mean no harm to your people." Edward quickly interjected. "Perhaps a demonstration of goodwill on both sides would help ease tensions." He turned to Crag. "Would you be willing to show them your ice manipulation technology? It's truly remarkable." Crag hesitated, then nodded. He stepped forward, raising his hands. The human team tensed, but Edward motioned for them to wait. With a series of fluid gestures, Crag began to shape the ice around them. Columns rose from the ground, arching into delicate bridges. Intricate patterns formed on the walls, telling the story of Elani history in frozen relief. The humans watched in awe, their weapons lowering as they marveled at the display. Commander Morris's eyes gleamed with interest. "Incredible," she breathed. "The applications for such technology." Lyra, emboldened by the humans' reaction, stepped forward. "We have much to learn from each other," she said, her voice melodic through the translation device. "Our scientists have long studied the unique properties of Glacius 7's ice. Perhaps we could establish an exchange of knowledge." Commander Morris nodded slowly, a smile forming on her face. "I believe that could be arranged. Edward, it seems you've become quite the diplomat in your time here." Edward felt a flush of pride, tempered by the weight of responsibility. "I've had excellent teachers," he said, glancing at Lyra. Her antennae quivered in response, her bioluminescence pulsing in a pattern he'd never seen before. As the two groups began to mingle, the tension in the air gradually dissipated. Scientists from both sides eagerly compared notes, while the more militant members engaged in respectful demonstrations of their technologies. Edward found himself at the center of it all, translating concepts and mediating discussions. He noticed Lyra watching him intently, her eyes following his every movement. When their gazes met, he felt a now familiar warmth spreading through his chest. Commander Morris pulled Edward aside, her voice low. We need to establish a base camp near the Elani settlement. I want you to work with Lyra on creating a cultural exchange program. Your unique position makes you ideal for this role. Edward nodded, trying to ignore the flutter in his stomach at the thought of working closely with Lyra. Of course, Commander. I'll do my best. As the humans began setting up their equipment, Edward sought out Lyra. He found her examining one of the team's handheld scanners, her antennae twitching with curiosity. Lyra, he said softly. She looked up, her bioluminescence brightening. We've been assigned to work together on a cultural exchange program. I thought perhaps we could start by discussing the differences in our social structures. Lyra's eyes widened with excitement. Oh yes, I've been particularly curious about human mating practices. Your emotional bonds seem so complex compared to our biological imperatives. Edward felt his face grow hot. Well, that's certainly one aspect we could explore, but perhaps we should start with something more general? Before Lyra could respond, a commotion near the Elani settlement entrance caught their attention. Odin, the Elani chieftain, was approaching rapidly, his expression grave. We've received a transmission from the Galactic Council, he announced, his voice booming through the cavern. They demand an explanation for the human presence on Glacius 7. They see it as a violation of Edward's exile and a potential act of aggression. The air in the cavern grew thick with tension. Edward's mind raced, considering the implications. He looked at Lyra, saw the fear in her eyes, and made a decision. I have a proposal, he said, stepping forward. All eyes turned to him, human and Elani alike. Lyra and I will travel to the Galactic Council headquarters. We'll present our case as representatives of a new human-Elani alliance. We can argue for lifting the sanctions against Earth and recognizing the Elani as a sovereign species worthy of council membership. A murmur ran through the crowd. Commander Morris frowned. It's risky, Edward. The council might see it as further provocation. Which is why I volunteer to accompany them, Craig's voice rumbled. Edward turned, surprised to see the Elani warrior step forward. As a warrior ambassador, I can provide protection and lend credibility to our claim of alliance. Commander Morris considered for a moment, then nodded. We have a modified stealth ship that could get you there undetected. It's a long shot, but it might be our best chance. As the groups began to discuss the logistics of the mission, Edward felt Lyra's hand slip into his. He looked down, watching the patterns of light dance across her skin. Are you sure about this? She whispered, her antenna brushing against his cheek. Edward squeezed her hand gently. No, he admitted. But I'm sure about us. Whatever happens, we face it together. Lyra's bioluminescence pulsed in a rhythm that matched Edward's heartbeat. As they stood there on the precipice of a journey that would determine the fate of both their peoples, Edward realized that his exile had led him to something he never expected to find, a connection that transcended the boundaries of worlds. Species and worlds. As the gravity of their missions settled upon them, Edward, Lyra, and Craig boarded the modified stealth ship provided by Commander Morris. The sleek vessel hummed to life, its advanced systems designed to evade detection by even the most sophisticated council scanners. As they lifted off from Glacius 7's icy surface, Edward couldn't help but marvel at how quickly his life had changed. Just days ago, he had been in exile, and now he was at the center of a mission that could reshape galactic politics. Lyra's bioluminescence pulsed with excitement as she examined the ship's controls. The technology here is fascinating, she said, her antennae twitching. It's so different from our ice manipulation systems, yet I can see similarities in the underlying principles. Craig grunted, his massive frame barely fitting in the pilot's seat. Let's hope it's as effective as it is interesting. We can't afford to be detected. As they navigated through the star-studded void, Edward found himself stealing glances at Lyra. The way her skin shimmered in the dim light of the cockpit was mesmerizing. He shook his head, trying to focus on the task at hand. There would be time to explore these feelings later, if they survived this mission. Their journey proceeded smoothly for several hours until a sudden jolt rocked the ship. Warning lights flashed across the control panel, bathing the cockpit in an ominous red glow. "What's happening?" Edward asked, gripping his seat. Cragg's hands flew over the controls, his bioluminescence pulsing rapidly. "The cloaking system is failing. We're visible to any nearby patrols." Lyra quickly pulled up a star chart. "There's an asteroid field nearby. We could land and make repairs." With no other options, they steered the ship towards a large asteroid, feeling the pull of its weak gravity as they approached. Cragg managed a rough landing, the ship scraping against the rocky surface before coming to a stop. As they exited the ship, the stark reality of their situation became clear. The asteroid was a barren wasteland of jagged rocks and deep craters. The distant sun provided little warmth, and the vast emptiness of space loomed all around them. "We need to work quickly," Edward said, surveying the damage to the ship's exterior. "The longer we stay here, the greater the chance of being discovered." They divided the tasks. Cragg would use his strength to move the necessary equipment, Lyra would apply her scientific knowledge to diagnose the problem, and Edward would use his human ingenuity to devise repairs. As they worked, Lyra's curiosity got the better of her. "Edward," she said, her voice tinged with excitement, "I've been thinking about our discussion on human physiology. The ship's medical bay has some advanced scanning equipment. Perhaps we could—" Edward felt his face flush. "Lyra, I'm not sure this is the time for—" "It could be important," she insisted. "What if there are biological factors that could affect our mission? We should be prepared." Reluctantly, Edward agreed to a quick examination. As Lyra ran her scans, her eyes widened with surprise. "This is remarkable," she exclaimed. "There are unexpected similarities between human and Elani biology. The implications for our species' evolution are fascinating." Before they could discuss further, Cragg's voice boomed from outside. "I've found something. You need to see this." They hurried to join him, finding the Elani warrior crouched behind a large boulder. In the distance, partially hidden by a crater, was a sleek structure that seemed out of place on the desolate asteroid. "A council listening post," Cragg growled. "They must be monitoring this sector." Edward's mind raced. "This could be an opportunity. If we can access their systems, we might gather valuable intelligence for our mission." Cragg nodded, his warrior instincts kicking in. "I'll infiltrate the facility. My training has prepared me for this." As Cragg stealthily made his way towards the listening post, Edward and Lyra returned to the ship to continue repairs. They worked in companionable silence, each lost in thought about the implications of Lyra's scans and the potential information Cragg might uncover. Hours passed before Cragg returned, his expression grim. "I've downloaded their database," he said, holding up a small data crystal. "The Council, they're not what we thought. There's a conspiracy to suppress emerging species, including humans and Elani. They fear competition for galactic resources." The gravity of this revelation hung heavy in the air. Their mission had just become even more crucial. As they prepared to leave the asteroid, their sensors blared a warning. A ship was approaching. Fast. "Zorgans," Cragg spat, recognizing the configuration. "Aggressive expansionists. They must have detected us when our cloak failed." The Zorgan ship opened fire, energy blasts peppering the asteroid's surface. Edward, Lyra, and Cragg scrambled for cover, the repaired stealth ship their only hope of escape. In the chaos of the attack, Lyra's bioluminescence began to pulse erratically. Suddenly, a burst of intense light emanated from her body, momentarily blinding their attackers. The unexpected display gave them the opening they needed to reach their ship and take off. As they sped away from the asteroid, narrowly avoiding the Zorgon's weapons fire, Edward turned to Lyra in amazement. "What was that?" Lyra looked just as shocked. I don't know. It's never happened before. It felt like a defense mechanism, but I didn't consciously activate it." Their victory was short-lived as they received an urgent transmission from Commander Morris. "Earth is mobilizing its fleet," she reported, her voice tense. "They're preparing for potential conflict with the Council. Whatever you're planning, you need to do it fast." As the Galactic Council's space station loomed before them, Edward, Lyra, and Cragg exchanged determined looks. They had uncovered a conspiracy, survived an ambush, and discovered new abilities. Now they face their greatest challenge yet, convincing the Council to change course and avoid an interstellar war. Lyra's antenna quivered with a mix of anticipation and nervousness. "We should use my newfound abilities as evidence," she suggested. "It proves that emerging species have untapped potential." Crag flexed his massive hands. "We should confront them directly with the intelligence I gathered. Force them to acknowledge their deceit." Edward listened to both, his mind working to formulate a strategy that would incorporate their strengths. As they docked at the station, he took a deep breath. "We'll need to be diplomatic, but firm," he said. "We're not just representing ourselves anymore. The fate of Earth, the Elani, and countless other species rests on what happens here." The airlock hissed open, revealing a gleaming corridor that would lead them to the council chambers. Edward felt Lyra's hand slip into his, her skin cool against his palm. Crag placed a massive hand on Edward's shoulder, a gesture of solidarity. Together they stepped forward, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead in their fight for the future of interstellar relations. Their steps echoing through the gleaming corridor. As they approached the council chambers, Edward felt a growing sense of unease. The hallways were eerily empty, devoid of the bustling activity one would expect in such a crucial galactic hub. Suddenly, a squad of heavily armed guards materialized from hidden alcoves, surrounding them with raised weapons. Edward instinctively moved to protect Lyra, while Crag assumed a defensive stance. "Stand down," barked the lead guard, his energy rifle humming ominously. "You are under arrest for violating council directives and potential acts of aggression against member species." Edward's mind raced. How had they known? Before he could formulate a response, they were swiftly disarmed and escorted to a nearby holding cell. The energy barrier crackled to life, sealing them inside. Crag immediately began examining the cell, his warrior instincts kicking in as he searched for weaknesses. Lyra paced nervously, her bioluminescence flickering with agitation. Edward leaned against the wall, trying to piece together how their mission had been compromised. After several tense minutes of silence, Lyra approached Edward, her antennae twitching with curiosity. "Edward," she began, her voice low, "I know this may not be the ideal time, but I can't help wondering about human reproductive practices. How do they compare to Elani methods?" Edward felt his face grow hot, caught off guard by the sudden shift in conversation. "Well, he stammered, "it's a bit complicated. Humans have a biological process, but there's also a strong emotional component." As Edward awkwardly explained human mating rituals, he found himself acutely aware of Lyra's proximity. Her bioluminescence pulsed in sync with his words, creating an intimate atmosphere despite their dire circumstances. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the cell and their predicament faded away. The moment was shattered by Crag's triumphant grunt. "I've accessed their communication system," he announced, holding up a small device he had extracted from the wall. "The Council is in chaos. Earth's fleet mobilization has them panicked, and the Zorgans are demanding retribution for an attack on their scout ship." Edward's brow furrowed. "The asteroid, they must have reported our encounter." Using Crag's makeshift communicator, Edward managed to establish a tenuous connection with Commander Morris on Glacius 7. Her voice crackled through the device, heavy with concern. "Edward, the situation has escalated," Morris reported. "Earth's government has issued an ultimatum to the Council. They're demanding recognition and equal status. The fleet is en route to the Council headquarters as we speak." The gravity of the situation settled over them like a heavy shroud. They were no longer just fighting for their own freedom, but to prevent an interstellar war. Lyra's antennae suddenly perked up. "I have an idea," she said, her bioluminescence brightening with excitement. "My new abilities, I think I can use them to broadcast a message directly to the council chambers. If I can project images and data proving the value of our cooperation, it might change their minds." Before they could fully discuss Lyra's plan, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the corridor. Guards were coming to escort them to the council chamber. "Now or never," Edward muttered. He nodded to Crag, who immediately sprang into action. As the energy barrier deactivated, Crag lunged forward, catching the guards by surprise. Edward followed, using the hand-to-hand combat techniques he'd learned during his military training. Lyra focused her powers, creating a dazzling light show that disoriented their opponents. Together they fought their way through the station's corridors, a whirlwind of human ingenuity, Elani bioluminescence, and Crag's raw strength. Alarms blared, and the station trembled as they neared the central chamber. With a final burst of effort, they breached the massive doors of the council chamber. The scene before them was one of chaos. Council members argued vehemently, their voices rising above the cacophony of alarms. At the center of the debate stood the Zorgon representative, demanding immediate military action against Earth and its allies. Edward strode forward, his voice cutting through the din. "Members of the council," he began, his tone authoritative yet imploring, "we stand at a crossroads. The path you choose today will shape the future of our galaxy for generations to come." As he spoke, Lyra activated her bioluminescent abilities. The chamber filled with vivid three-dimensional images of Earth and Glacius 7, showcasing the beauty and potential of both worlds. Scenes of human and Elani cooperation played out, demonstrating the power of unity between species. "We've uncovered evidence of a conspiracy," Edward continued, his words punctuated by gasps from the council members. "A deliberate suppression of emerging species, driven by fear and a desire to maintain the status quo." Crag stepped forward, presenting the data crystal containing the intelligence they'd gathered on the asteroid. The chamber erupted into chaos as council members reacted to the revelation, some expressing shock and outrage, others attempting to deny the accusations. Suddenly, a new alarm cut through the commotion. The human fleet had arrived, taking up positions around the council headquarters. The situation teetered on the brink of war, with weapons primed and tensions at their breaking point. In this moment of crisis, Lyra stepped into the center of the chamber, her body glowing with an otherworldly light. "There is another way," she said, her voice resonating with newfound power. "I propose a temporary psychic link between representatives of each species. Allow us to share our thoughts, our experiences, our very essence. Only then can we truly understand one another." The council chamber fell silent, the weight of Lyra's proposal hanging in the air. Edward, Lyra, and Crag stood united, their fates intertwined with the future of galactic civilization. As the council deliberated, the trio exchanged determined glances, knowing that their next actions would shape the course of history. The chamber hummed with tension, every being present acutely aware that they stood on the precipice of a new era, one that would either usher in unprecedented cooperation or plunge the galaxy into devastating conflict. Conflict or plunge the galaxy into devastating war. The weight of their actions pressed down on Edward, Lyra, and Crag as they stood united before the council. In that charged moment, Edward stepped forward, his voice steady and clear. "I volunteer to be the first participant in this psychic link." His bold declaration silenced the chamber. All eyes turned to him, a mix of surprise, skepticism, and curiosity etched on the faces of the assembled council members. Lyra moved closer to Edward, her bioluminescent patterns shifting into an intense, pulsating glow. She placed a delicate hand on his arm, her skin cool against his. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Edward nodded, his gaze fixed on the council. "We've come too far to back down now." Crag grunted his approval, a hand on Edward's shoulder. "You have the strength for this, my friend." As Lyra prepared to establish the connection, the Zorgon representative bristled, mandibles clicking in agitation. "This is madness! You cannot expect us to open our minds to—" His protests were cut short as Lyra's bioluminescence flared, enveloping the chamber in a blinding light. In an instant, Edward felt his consciousness expand, merging with Lyra's, the Zorgon's, and those of key council members. The sensation was overwhelming. A torrent of memories, emotions, and knowledge flooded through him. He saw Earth through alien eyes, a vibrant blue marble teeming with life and potential. He felt the cool waters of Glacius 7, experienced the thrill of Lyra's first interstellar journey. The harsh plains of the Zorgon homeworld flashed before him, along with the deep-seated fear of resource scarcity that drove their aggressive expansion. As quickly as it began, the psychic link faded. Edward stumbled, his pupils dilating from the experience. Lyra steadied him, her touch anchoring him back to reality. The chamber remained silent, each being processing the shared experience. The Zorgon representative was the first to break the stillness, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. I withdraw my demands for retribution, he said, mandibles quivering. I see now that our conflict was born of misunderstanding. Murmurs rippled through the chamber as other council members nodded in agreement. Edward seized the moment, stepping forward once more. Members of the council, he began, his voice strong despite his lingering disorientation. What we've just experienced proves that we're capable of profound understanding when we open ourselves to it. I propose we form an interstellar cooperation initiative dedicated to fostering this kind of connection between all species. He outlined his vision, a new body focused on sharing knowledge, solving galactic-scale problems, and promoting mutual understanding. As he spoke, Edward could see the impact of his words. The fear and suspicion that had dominated the chamber earlier were replaced by curiosity and cautious optimism. When the vote was called, the result was nearly unanimous. The Interstellar Cooperation Initiative was approved, with Earth granted provisional membership in the Galactic Council. Edward found himself appointed as humanity's first representative, a role he accepted with a mix of pride and trepidation. As news of the peaceful resolution spread, reports came in of the human fleet standing down. The immediate threat of war had been averted, but Edward knew their work was a long way to go. In the chaos that followed the council's decision, Edward and Lyra found a moment of relative quiet. They stood in a small alcove off the main chamber, the distant sounds of celebration filtering through. I never thought I'd experience anything like that, Edward said, still processing the psychic link. It was incredible. Lyra's skin shimmered, her bioluminescence creating intricate patterns. It was more than I ever imagined, she replied, her voice filled with wonder. To truly understand another being, to share their experiences. Their eyes met, and Edward felt a surge of emotion. The psychic link had stripped away his final reservations. He took Lyra's hands in his, marveling at the contrast between her cool, smooth skin and his own. Lyra, he began, but was cut short as Crag burst into the alcove. Edward, Lyra, the warrior exclaimed, his eyes bright with excitement. Scientists from a dozen species are clamoring to study the Elani abilities. They're talking about forming a multi-species research team. Lyra's eyes widened, her antennae quivering with excitement. A multi-species team? To study bioluminescent communication and psychic linking? She turned to Edward, practically vibrating with enthusiasm. This is exactly the kind of cooperation we've been fighting for. Edward nodded, smiling at her excitement despite the interruption. It's a perfect opportunity for you to combine your scientific curiosity with your new role as an ambassador. As they discussed the possibilities, a message came through on Edward's communicator. They were needed back on Earth to begin preparations for their new roles and to inaugurate the Interstellar Cooperation Initiative. As they made their way to the shuttle bay, Edward found himself reflecting on their journey. He had started as an exiled diplomat, clinging to the hope of redemption. Now he stood at the forefront of a new era in galactic politics. Lyra, once driven by simple curiosity about human mating practices, had become a pioneer in interspecies understanding. Her unique abilities had opened doors that once seemed permanently closed. And Crag, who had initially viewed outsiders with suspicion and distrust, now embraced his position as a bridge between cultures. His strength and loyalty had proven invaluable throughout their ordeal. As they boarded the shuttle that would take them back to Earth, Edward felt a sense of anticipation. The galaxy was changing, and they were at the heart of that change. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew they would face them together. The shuttle's engines hummed to life, and as they lifted off from the council station, Lyra created a dazzling light show with her bioluminescence. It was visible even from the ground, a bright beacon heralding a new era of interstellar cooperation. As Earth grew larger in the view screen, Edward turned to his companions. "Ready for our next adventure?" he asked, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Lyra's antenna twitched in amusement. "Always," she replied, her skin pulsing with excitement. Crag simply nodded, a rare grin spreading across his face. Together they braced themselves for the challenges and opportunities that awaited them on Earth, eager to begin their work as ambassadors of a new, united galaxy.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.